I think novels are an unimprovable technology, rather like books physically are. And that, though they develop and they evolve, I mean, I'm not pretending that there isn't some sort of historical contingency that changes the types of novels people write or the form that they take. I think essentially what you're trying to do, which is communicate human experience in the form of a story, or if not a story, something that belongs within the covers of a book. I don't think that the motivation to do that, or the practice of how you do that, changes much because of developing technologies or changing news cycles or technological fads. This is a pretty timeless calling. And whilst I'm aware people might say that that's a very romantic or naive way of it, you persuade me otherwise. I don't see it. If you want to be a novelist because you believe that, like being a priest or a politician, it might afford you a certain respect. When I say politician, I mean politician of integrity. But in theory, these are roles that people defer to, that they come to and expect some sort of wisdom or insight from. Then I also think you'll be disappointed, because there are millions of novelists and hundreds of millions, I'm shit at maths, so I might be exaggerating, of dead novelists. So you're competing against all of those. And the chances are that the label novelist is just as likely to persuade people that you're deluded, pretentious or mad, as it is convince them that you are following a calling that they can only envy and aspire towards, themselves. So I think the only motivation to make it worth your while writing is because you are desiring to communicate something really important that you can't remain silent about to your readership. But motivation, I think, is unchanging, which is, I must share this. And I would like to do it in a medium that is one that I can expend my artistry on and make beautiful. And one that I think can have some sort of relationship that I'm trying to express, a relationship with what I'm trying to express that will make it permanent, that will speak for me forever, and arrange it in such a way as for it to maintain its freshness, its verve, its truth, its directness, and its entertainment value. Whereas my speech, my words, they're gone. I'm in motion. This thing might just stay still for a bit. That's the kind of motivation that ought to lie behind writing a book. There are others, but I think that you will end up disappointed and disenchanted, because writing is absolutely ruthless, and quite often the only way you can measure its success is by the work itself, having done it and feeling like you've got nothing to prove to anyone. I mean, if you can't do that, you're just left wanting. I started writing because I started writing in my teens as a response to experience, and because I thought it was an involuntary response to being alive. That's how I began writing. It was the only way in which I could complete experiences by writing about them, and the best way I could think both of understanding and comprehending life properly, and sharing that comprehension and understanding with anybody who thought it was worth their while to be open to me and to seeing things the way that I did. And I understood that being cocky and egotistical, as I certainly was then and may still be, self-expression was what I was going to be making my living out of doing. And writing seemed to me then, as it does now, as the most important thing I could do with my life. That wonderful as other things in life were, if I couldn't write, I couldn't understand what the point was. Now, of course, I understand what the point is. There are millions of wonderful things, flowers, children, my children, your kids, whoever, skies, cloud movement, all of it's great. But if I wasn't writing, I didn't know whether I'd enjoy any of it properly. Because it wasn't just that I had to communicate. it was that I had to communicate and connect, and that if I didn't, I wouldn't have the self-respect to be able to bear up to life and all the things that are involved in that. So as far as motivation was concerned, that was the bedrock, and that was more important to me than greatness. Though there was vanity in it too. I mean, you've got to be very vain. I work with authors, and this morning I was thinking of a few, and I was thinking, Jesus Christ, these prima donnas. But that is a necessary condition, A, to care enough about your book to write it, and B, to be in a position to write it in the first place, really, I think. But the vanity part is there too, and I do remember, and I haven't really thought of even talking about this, but I remember going into the National Portrait Gallery. I was at King's College, and my first term going to the National Portrait Gallery and sitting down opposite Bill Brandt's photograph of Graham Greene, where he is staring enigmatically at the camera, and I thought, yeah, I like that, that's me. We're the same. That's it, isn't it? Yeah. And a friend's mum had come back from Ireland and had a poster that he used to pick up in Dublin of all the great writers. So, you know, he had all the great Irish writers. So there was Yeats and Joyce and Brendan Behan and Beckett, and they're all staring at the camera. I thought, this is it. This is what I want to get my teeth into, you know. So there is a kind of aesthetic impulse behind it that is all-encompassing and far-reaching, but also quite shallow and coming from a place of greater vanity.
It was initiated by a nightmare, and so...
Yeah.
Do you remember?
I had this nightmare, and I have a novelist's memory. It's intense and selective, but it's pretty good. And dreams have always been sources of information for me, so I treat them with nervousness and caution and reverence even, because I feel like I'm being told something by whatever, unconscious or animistic night spirits, I don't know. But in this dream, I am this woman, early middle-aged woman, and I am holding the sheets to my face, and they've been urinated in, and outside my son is digging up the corpse of a dead cat. Wow. And this house is at the mercy of unmediated and irreducible evil, and it is so terrible that all I can do is pull these sheets up to my eyes so I can't see it. And the physical, visceral sense of these sheets and the stench and the hopelessness and the intimidating and frightening sense of being at the mercy of evil that you cannot do anything about because it has no good in it that you can appeal to. I woke up with that. I thought, Christ, I'm going to have to write about that. That's the book right there. But I'm not ready yet, so I don't want to write about that. I've got 3 other books to do, and I need to see if anyone's going to publish them. But that one's coming. And sure enough, it did derail the career that I had. But it had to be written. I'm overdoing it. It didn't derail, but it certainly didn't do much good. But it did give me a sort of minor cult following amongst horror enthusiasts. There was a great day where a friend of mine who worked at the King's Road Waterstones, and he said a very tall black I guess now you'd say transgender, she came in and said, have you got any other books like Content in Your Wealth? This is what I'm into reading for. And I thought, good, there's an audience out there, you know, because it was the first book I wrote where I didn't have the certainty that there would be a readership, whereas before I always knew there would be, and where I had had negative feedback on many of the drafts, including from my old editor and several other editors we sent it to that were interested in it, but wary, and even friends I had taken to showing drafts of which I hadn't done before, had reservations. And even in writing it, it was the first book that didn't completely write itself, that I was simply committing to paper. This one resisted that. It wasn't simply a matter of allowing it to come from inside of me and delivering it. There had to be a high level of manipulation and care spent over its construction, and a lot of deliberation, which there hadn't been in my other books. The plots had moved quite organically. The story had told itself. The material had decided how fast I should write it at. This book was completely different.
Yeah.
So there were all those misgivings, and also it was horrible to write, whereas the other books had been joyful to write. I had learnt to writing them, and loved it, enjoyed, so that it was one of my favourite things in life to be sat down constructing them. And Contented New Wealth wasn't like that at all. I'd get to about 3 in the afternoon and I was like, oh God, this is frightening me. I don't want to carry on writing this thing. And by the time I got to bedtime, I couldn't sleep. So it didn't come easily, is what I'm saying.
So how did you sort of texture in, the most powerful way of deploying the supernatural through this narrative?
It's a mixture of really believing in it, and there are writers that would say, well, of course we don't believe in any of it. It's a sort of series of literary special effects that you set up. That the only thing that matters is that your characters believe in it, and it's plausible. But that would have, for me, led to a intolerable level of reader manipulation. Now, there always must be reader manipulation, and the better you write, the sort of further into the palm of your hand the reader's responses are, so that you can prefigure and guess exactly what's going to happen because of where you put the full stop. And I think I can do that pretty well. I know I can do it I know I can do it technically, and if people don't like my work, they don't like my work, but I can write, and I know this. It's not something I feel necessary to prove. And I think I demonstrated it in Contented New Wealth. The reason why it was so disturbing and upset quite secular, atheistic, reductive, materialistic people. So there's something about that book that's just, dirty. I don't like it. It's unfair the way it's coming in. Is because I believed in the truth, and I mean truth in the naive, emergent, old-fashioned sense, in the truth of irreducible evil as some sort of metaphysical force in the universe that takes possession of us and that we do the bidding of. And although it is useful to work out how societally people can behave in evil ways and how we can reduce the likelihood of that by kindness or love or patience or welfare systems or whatever, and I think that's really important. I really, really do think it's important. It's not it, because at the end of every encounter with evil, whether it's people talking to genocidaries in Rwanda or these endless programs on, what went on at Cromwell Street, we're left puzzled. It's actually the great mystery of evil, not just the great problem. In the end, we can't understand. We don't. There's some missing yard to really grasping what on earth could have possessed people to act in a way that is completely wicked, and serves no other end than self-reference, the furthering of evil itself. So because I believe that and wanted to demonstrate it in a book, it allowed me to manipulate and craft reactions through my material that I would never normally have been so studied, so careful, so pinpoint precision-like about. It meant that I didn't have any inhibition in terms of pinning the reader to the wall and laying it on, because I believe in the ultimate truth of what it was I was trying to convey. And the most effective way of doing that is to employ all the devices of a mystery writer, a thriller writer, and of a horror writer. And I had been disappointed in lots of the horror books that I had read, because I read a lot of them before I began this. And I think when the author really is open to the possibility of what it is they're writing about, like I think Henry James was in The Turn of the Screw, you have a very different kind of book than ones where you know that the author is is enjoying what they're doing, but they don't really believe in any of it. It's a variant on fantasy. And of course, in any genre, there's certain conventions, and pretty soon, you're being buggered about with. Whereas I think if there's an element of belief in there, then that carries over and properly unsettles, rather than simply scares, which is good too. I mean, you've got to be scary. But if that's all you are, then it's a very partial. You're only partially fulfilling the function of what you've set out to achieve in writing horror. And I'm not for a moment saying, as some horror writers thought at the time and took exception to, that they are simply genre writers and should be dismissed as such. I mean, there are very, very good writers in horror. They don't need me to say that. But what I didn't find very much of was detailed, immersive, naturalistic literature that could be about anything, but just happened to be about horror, where the horror emerges out of the story. That was not thick around the ground. I mean, I could think of maybe half a dozen books that I found reading far and wide like that, where you wouldn't really know you were reading horror until it arrives. And I think I had always had in mind wanting to write a book like that, because not just for me, but for many of us, The Exorcist was a pretty definitive experience. One of the many marvellous things about The Exorcist is that for the first 20 minutes, or maybe more actually, and whenever you watch one of these old films, you are always amazed at how slow they are compared to what we have nowadays. But it's also brilliant that they're so slow. Same with Jaws, But for the first 20 minutes or so, you wonder whether you're not just watching a film about a struggling single mother actress in Georgetown. And it's quite compelling. It's interesting. She's up against it. And she's got a bright but lonely daughter. And that's fun. It's only because you get these leaves sort of blowing up and, Michael Oldfield starts in the background, dun, 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 that you're thinking, there's something really fucking awful in this as well, that is worse than what we see. And I certainly wanted to write a literary equivalent of that, where you believe that you are going to be taken into some 1980s story about the yuppie dream and how at heart it's simply rabid materialism, and that this is an analogy for possession, but it's not really possession. It's about mental illness, because desire to acquire wealth for its own sake sends people ill and mad. I wanted that in there, but that's just the frame. It really is about Satan and nasties.
Yeah,
and
in
all the rest of it.
reading I had a different novels, part 1, part 2, and what you're saying about the sense of being unsettled, like this was my experience of the first part, but then as soon as the director came into the scene, the whole thing kind of become bigger, or became more, it became something else.
Yes. I mean, it would have been impossible. I think there's some people that prefer the first half reading, and others that didn't understand why there was this boring first half and why couldn't we just begin with the second. I think there's a point in a book where you have to be overt about what it's about. Yeah. And though I like novels that are long on suggestion and don't, that are nuanced and labyrinthine and layered, and mine, I hope, are. I think you have to show your hand, and at a certain point, if you have a hand to show. I mean, if you don't, and your novel is one long second guess, then, you know, by all means you can carry on in that. Is this Satan, or is she simply overworked or mentally ill, or, and that would stand. But I did want a proper clash between the secular and, if you like, the religious or the supernatural views of the world, and to have something overt and bloody, you know, a proper confrontation, and I wanted it to be about the problem of evil, and I couldn't do that by continuing in code, showing hints, keeping the action rumbling below an unnerving surface. There had to be an explosion.
Nightmare that initiated that. And so one of the possibilities of dealing with nightmares is reliving the dream and introducing a kind of a resolution in order to integrate the material of the nightmare. And in a way, the rector was kind of a figure like that, almost a therapeutic kind of figure that enabled even me as a reader to integrate.
I know, but also, you know, a sort of supernatural figure almost too. You can imagine disappearing at the end of the book in a puff of smoke. I mean, in a way, because I write books, I'm not looking for resolution. In the conventional sense of the term. Quite a long time ago, I gave up, I think, needing things to either be resolved or to be settled to my satisfaction. I realised that it was going to be impossible, and that I would just have to live with my underrations and sense of what might or might not be the case, however imperfectly, and that I would still be able to have a fulfilling and inquiring life, you know, were I to continue along these lines. So writing books is a useful and necessary way for me to not go mad, but I'm not looking in those books to resolve the tensions that gave rise to them. I let the blow land where it falls, and I give it back, you know. The rector for me was a way of showing how good is really just as mysterious as evil. It's just as puzzling. And before either of those things, consciousness itself is fairly extraordinary. And I wanted, it's probably of all the books I've ever written, to work through things of philosophical interest to me that I had been either too embarrassed to deal with explicitly in my other books, or thought that they would spoil the stories I was telling in those books, or I thought they would get in the way of the other points I was trying to make in those books. And also the fear of boring the reader. I mean, is anybody really ready or prepared for this? And I guess it took me 4 books in to become confident enough to lay these things out and put them down. And having done so, never need to again, you know.
Oh, you know, I mean, he's such an enigmatic figure, the rector.
He's living in a caravan in the New Forest now. Yeah.
Exactly. I mean,
but also that God is as terrible as the devil. Yeah. I mean, the rector is in many ways more terrifying than the possessed woman and Iblis. You know, I mean, Jesus Christ.
I mean, he seems to be doing something off the chart of the usual sort of Exorcist.
Yeah, he is.
Figure, so but he seems to be doing something.
I know, but we've already had the official Exorcist. We know about the Catholic Church. And I'll tell you, when I realised that I may still have a problem like this, was I was in New York, extremely jet-lagged and hungover, and at 5 a.m. found myself watching William Friedkin's new film on Father Amorphe, the Vatican's chief exorcist,
Oh, yeah.
with this sort of screaming, kicking off, and all the rest of it. And about 5:15, I thought, this isn't right, you know. I shouldn't be doing this. This isn't how people relax.
Yeah.
I think I was conscious that the traditional Father Karras, the kind of emblem of all the great things in Christianity that we would like it all to be like, you know, is pretty authoritatively been done by Peter Blatty and Friedkin in the film, and in the many different sort of spin-offs, and you know that we're there. You know, you've got the solidity and the good, you know, the paracry, and then you've got Satan. And I wanted an exorcist that was more terrifying than Satan. Yeah. You know, the God really is something to be feared. You think the devil is bad, try and follow through the logic of God now. Yeah. So I felt like I had to do something more ambitious, both to be philosophically true and consistent with what I was trying to do, but also to be original, you know, novelistically original, and do something powerful that the reader hadn't come across yet in this format, because I think that the symbolism of the Catholic Church and the symbolism of the devil are not absolute good and absolute evil. They are just the only forms that human beings can find to express these things in such a way as to make them intelligible to us. The real mysteries are far deeper than any expression, pantomime or otherwise, of evil can express, or any expression of good can express. The mysteries of religion are way beyond anything religion can codify or think of or put in their books or prayers, or even in our practice or conduct as, say, spiritual people. We are at the very tip of the mystery. And the reason why the devil comes into the bodies of people and they start sort of doing all this, your mother stews cocks in hell, is because this is just the form we can think of evil taking in a way that makes sense to us. But it's a bare droplet of what we're in fact dealing with and what is the inner animating principle of actual evil itself. So I'm talking about the mystery of evil, and for me that has to go with the mystery of good and the terrible awfulness of God. And the Rector was a way of, you know, making that manifest in a novel. Yeah, no, Father Karras never read Deleuze. Yeah, I know. Exactly. And also didn't look like Dr. Kananga. Yeah, you know. Yeah, so
he has this. Do you ever feel like, oh, you know, he's got a, you know, I wouldn't mind following his story. Another one kind of thing, or like.
Jeez, you know, I'm only 43, moving into a new house. I don't know what the supernatural activities like in there, but I have got a study that's staring, which I think I can see the whole universe from, which is staring right into the sort of setting sun. And there's nothing like setting suns to inspire stories of evil, you know, the bleeding lizard skins. So possibly, the Rector, Police Academy 2 style, Exactly. I think I wanted a worldly and credible voice for good that could understand the counter-arguments, so that there was no point delivering them. So don't try getting clever with me, you know. You know, I've got Dawkins in my front pocket. The fucking post-structuralists are cocksuckers. So screw you. This is between good and evil, you know. Rather than the kind of innocent country priest whose goodness is what is going to terrify the devil out of this poor guy. Okay, spare me. You know, we've had that.
He's also got this kind of fairy king vibe to him, this Welshness that, you know, disappears off to the hills again. So is this an older... Well,
it is. Yeah, primordial, Cooper Powers-esque. Sort of pantheistic mysticism. I think that pretty well sums up where I am on the religious spectrum.
Instead of having Satan in its classical form, we have Iblis as the kind of Islamic sort of
because Satan comes with quite a lot of received signifiers and baggage. I mean, we all kind of know where we are with Satan. Iblis was just a way of trying to make it unfamiliar so that people weren't going to arrive with an expectation of what the devil was going to do next, partly.
I thought it was as the fallen angel who refuses to bow to Adam as imposed by God.
It's there all in all, you know, Prometheus as well, and Sisyphus, the rebel that rebels against the gods, and in doing so shows greater goodness than a god that demands sheer obedience. Yeah, I mean, it's not all bad. To live with God, you've got to live with the rules. And there's a lot about the rules that we bloody hate, like time passing, us dying, people we love dying. I mean, who wants to live with all of that, you know? When you can live forever, or, you know, capture the flame of fire. So the rebels appeal to our human instincts to revolt against the whole temporal existential order. But they're also, in doing so, attacking the very conditions that allow life to be possible and meaningful for us. So it's a question of you must submit to the authority. It's shallow not to, you know, but we nonetheless, I think, admire their bollocks for having a go.
The book, it reads like, oh, it's going to be a satire on contemporary life, and it suggests a much lighter or more cynical or more.
I hope that the cover with the skull might send someone back on it. I've never struggled more with the title than I have with this book. Okay. I won't tell you what the first title was, but needless to say, I got some pretty concrete feedback that it sucked goats. And the original title was West End Girls, because I was going for a sort of 80s. Okay, it's set in the 80s and it's full of 80s-ness. Ironically, I actually bumped into Chris Lowe and Neil Tennant and the Pet Shop Boys whilst I was writing it in Selfridges, and told them about the book, and they're like, oh, what a great title, you know. And in the end, it didn't come to be. But I knew that I wanted something from a song in the 80s that captured the zeitgeist and the atmosphere in the book that the story unravels under. And the Jams' bitterest pill I've had to swallow, the line, I am tone deaf, so I'm not going to sing it, but you were the picture of contented new wealth. So it's from there.
Cool.
And I was immediately told it was too long, but I knew it would work. It's a book that's against reduction and reductionism in every form, all forms of reduction, and the belief that to reduce is to get nearer the truth of things. Now, admittedly, most people that are into reduction would deny that there is such a thing as truth anyway, but you know what I'm getting at, that to reduce gets you closer to the facts of the matter, or a particular picture that we can live with, or the single most useful working hypothesis or whatever. And I don't think it does. I think forget truth then, but what is important for us as human beings carries on being important, even if it's chimerical or illusionary. It's still important. So why talk about it as somehow less important than something that really does exist? What really does exist more than what we give value, what things that we give value to. And the big backdrop to the book is the 80s. We know how to live now. This is the answer. The laissez-faire, neoliberal, let's make lots of money thing. And that is the answer to life. And now we can just get on and enjoy our private pursuits in our spare time. And it's not, I'm not breaking new ground here, but it's not a particularly compelling worldview. I mean, this shop wouldn't exist if you thought that was the case, or that was enough. But that without some sort of unashamedly spiritual dimension in life, and I think you don't have to believe in spirits for this to be true, life is only partial, and partially experienced and felt as a lack and limitation. And that's something I really wanted to put across. But to not do so in the terms you might expect, but in the weird and deranged terms I chose for this book, but it's a book against reductionist explanations for things, both in terms of this irreducible evil that is sort of lurking, but also in terms of what is valuable and important for people. And I think I wanted to write, I mean, I don't want to make any assumptions here, but I'm assuming you both remember the 80s.
Sure.
You were around.
You know, that must have been one of the heydays of like the horror paperback.
Yeah, it was. It was, of course. And you very kindly said, you know, the book left an impression. And that was exactly what the horror novels of that period didn't do for me.
Yeah.
I mean,
they just, like kind of
it just didn't happen. And I would eagerly, you know, go and get Slugs or, you know, Salem's Lot or, you know, the Rats or whatever. I mean, it was like comics or something. It was like a genre, you know, you go into W.H. Smith's and underneath the Dennis Weekly section, you know, another New Forest writer, an expert on Satanism, you had horror, and it was massive. And what I recall about those books is that as you read them, they were frightening, and then you got to the end of the page and there was nothing left. I've often wanted to know where Alan Watts' section was here, because I saw him, he came up bizarrely as one of my YouTube things that I should be interested in, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, that's my kind of spiritual guy. So walking around with a bottle of Glenfiddich and a cigarette, laughing at his own jokes as a perplexed group of students think, this is Zen, you know.
About it.
Later. Sure. Sorry. That's how unegocentric I am. I'm ready to give the mic back to Alan. Yeah. When I pass over the threshold, he'll be there. You know, saved you a seat, son. Pull up a pew.
Wittgenstein quote at the beginning of the second part.
Yeah.
Tell me how you search, and I tell you what you're searching for. And so the first one, Adorno was pretty straight in.
The Wittgenstein thing is that, just sort of say, the way that we characterize evil is within the terms of reference that make it intelligible to us. But that what we do in that is to misunderstand it and reduce it, and to shrink it into something intelligible at the expense of what it is itself. And one might argue back, well, what is it in itself other than its impressions to us? Well, quite a lot, because our impressions are partial and limited by perspective and view. Whereas this thing overflows around the sides, and that you can be aware of things without being able to characterize or know what they are. And I think this awareness is actually a pretty relevant category. People might say, well, you know, what's the criteria for awareness? It's a bit bloody woo-woo and vague in general. Yeah, quite a lot of life is, but that doesn't mean that it's not relevant. And I found that when I was writing the book, actually, this was one of the things that made it such a unpleasant day-to-day experience to write, is that there was a sort of awareness, both of the themes of the book and things pertaining to the subject matter, and of evil in general and of itself, that made me feel like I was kind of conducting everything that was sort of sick and awful in the world. I hoped that I could challenge the assumptions of people that think that spirituality is a complete waste of time by writing the book, and perhaps also alert them to spiritual concerns themselves, because I know a lot of very intelligent secular people who are upset, and I really feel like saying, but can't you understand that if you had something like a spiritual life, if you acknowledged you had a soul and it's this that is ailing you, you know, because there are certain things you need to do to keep it in trim, it might not be as bad as it is. Whereas that isn't really, if you like, in the world of I suppose of secular Western intellectuals, and that can cover everything from, you know, Marxists and Maoists on one hand to Oxford linguistic philosophy on the other. That isn't a sensible thing to say. That's almost akin to saying I'm a twat, run away, hide, you know. Or you know, it's kind of saying I've given up the serious intellectual activity of trying to work out what is the case, and instead have gone to hug a tree and hope that it'll speak to me. And, you know, of course, the most ludicrous proponents of the sorts of things that are in this shop are easily satirizable. But because something is absurd, easy satirizable, and piss easy to laugh at, basically, you know, remember Adam Ant's words, ridicule is nothing to be scared of. It doesn't mean that it isn't true or important or meaning-giving, or at least as useful a meaning-giving activity as, you know, philosophy is, or science. And the snobbery and the suspicion, and if not outright contempt, for anything with spirit, spiritual or soul in it that comes from the many intellectual people, that there's just nothing worthwhile going on in that direction, means that there are blind spots, terrible blind spots and vulnerability in modern philosophical thinking. And it is a very incomplete story. And it isn't persuasive as a consequence, or never as completely persuasive as it ought to be. And, you know, conversely, there's a lot about philosophical rigour that the, if you like, mind, body, spirit, or the, could learn from. Yeah, rigour, definitely. You know, to weed out the bullshit and perhaps make the whole thing marginally less easy to laugh at. But I felt that by mixing unashamedly these different things together in one place, just to show that at the very least one single mind could contain it all, and not be, I hope, a complete plonker, would be a useful way of not instigating the debate, but showing that these connections can credibly be made and ought to be more often.
How did you develop the voice or character of Bridget?
I wanted somebody that would be sensible enough to reject a possession as, well, it's just a migraine, or maybe I had some cheese before I went to bed. That I mean, you know, so often whoever is possessed seems to be possessed before they're possessed. It's like, bloody hell, there's something wrong with that girl, you know. I wanted somebody that looked like they were the impersonification of practical, common sense, materialist, number crunching values, who would have absolutely no truck with being possessed, even if they were, because they wouldn't believe it was happening to them. And it's important that she doesn't believe that it's happening to her. That the first person doubting it isn't the doctor or, you know, the professor or the psychoanalyst that comes and does the test. It's the actual person themselves. Look, this can't be happening to me. It's bullshit. I thought that would probably be the most effective way of addressing the predictable skeptical objection, that the person themselves doesn't think it's the case and can't because of the sort of person they are.
I love the line. I think it around like English first language was enigmatic silence.
Yeah. That's, yeah, well, I mean, there's a Germanic thing going on in Bridget as well. And the enigmatic silence is really a saying of, I know exactly what to make of you all, but the effort of telling you would just be too great, you know. But there's a smugness there. There's a smug self-satisfaction in being so above the fray, and that eventually you're going to be pulled in. You know, life will get you in the end. And this woman can't, you know, this woman that is in a relationship, basically for world domination. I mean, you know, this is an 80s power couple. They're not together. It's not exactly a love match, but it's not a not love match. It's just that they realise that by getting together, they will be able to make best use of each other to further the cause of them and their family in the world. That's the upshot. She'll accept philandering. He'll accept that she's not all that bloody exciting. But they are together as world domination enterprises. Look how much we can get together as a unit. And that they can remain above the fray and not be pulled into life. And everyone gets pulled into life in the end. And the less prepared you are for that, because you thought you were never going to be pulled into it, the more you'll suffer when that happens. The more normal you are, and the more straightforward you believe you are, and the less susceptible you think you are to demons or ghouls or ghosts, or the less susceptible you think you are to stupid stuff like having a broken heart or being depressed or being oversensitive, you know, feeble-mindedness, the more fucked up you'll be when you're delivered to these things, as indeed you will be in the end, you know, because it's impossible to go through life and not be touched and reached and affected by it and all the things it has in store for you. So there's an element of she's getting her comeuppance, but also this is not the sort of person who thought this was going to happen to them. And also there's no religious thing in that house. Usually both in films and in literature and everything, it's no surprise that somebody that can already speak Latin should be the person that is possessed and speaks Latin, you know. Yeah, I think there's some people really looking forward to the devil coming in through their ear and, you know, getting their money's worth for all these years of fearing it happening at last. Unchosen, thank you.
I love the idea that it's sort of there in her doctoral thesis, though. You can kind of, if you go between the lines.
Well, that's the point. That's the terrifying thing. Yeah. The devil's always watching you, and you don't know what criteria he's going to use because it's not humanly intelligible. Yeah. Just like if you believe in God, you really, if you're at all honest, can't know why he has spared us and allowed another 3 children in Rohingya village, I mispronounced that, to be immolated or burnt alive or something. I mean, why us? What did we do to deserve to not be killed in our beds? We don't know. We're not reading the same script, are we? The same thing, you know, with Satan. Why would he be following this woman, watching her well before she realised she was being watched, when there are all sorts of more likely candidates that are passed over? And that's one of the things that makes it so unpredictable, and because it's so unpredictable, so frightening, I hope, you know. The obvious signifiers aren't there. They're not going to church, they're not religious, they're completely uninterested in any kind of concept of an inner life. This house is waiting for them. Right. They were always going to come there because there's predestination. There's predestination. And the more free they think they're being, the more they're playing into predestination. Sure. Because if free will is the sign of good, they are not using their free will. They are always being causally led into things. So they never have a moment where they go, actually, we're not going to do the predictable thing here. We'll do the unpredictable here and exercise our freedom just for the sheer hell of doing something that isn't causally determined or in our best interests. They keep going through the hoops of least resistance to this house that is their date with the devil, waiting for them. I suppose the other thing is psychic energy. Do some places have it? I mean, do you think this shop does? I do. I think this whole Cecil Court does, you know. So it's that, you know, there are places where, you know, put you and the place together and you're in trouble. And it's not true of everyone, you know, not everybody is going to feel the same way. And it might be completely unnoticeable to someone else, but for you it's the worst place on earth you can be left in.
In your mind, what's the sort of floor plan of this building? I mean, how do you visualise it?
I deliberately stopped doing so once I recognised that there was one, you know. When I recognised there was one, I then knew any angle I could take would be plausible and the reader wouldn't think, hang on, you know, that shouldn't be there. But that it wasn't necessary to evoke it in its entirety again. And I think you'll find in The Haunting of Hill House, which is a great, great book, Shirley Jackson. And I didn't read it until after I'd finished this one, just because I had a mind to, but I thought, well, you know, I'm going very close to where she might be going, and I just you know, it may not be particularly useful for me to be under the influence of of her at the time, which isn't the way I normally feel about things. I'll read anything normally, but in that, the house is almost shifting, moving being. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to work out how the rooms hang together or the corridors do or any of it. Nearly you wonder whether people are just inventing whole floors and someone doesn't want to sleep in the main room and sleeps in a sitting room and then there's another hall, and the point is it exists, but she's not helping you, and it's never implausible that it is the way it is. You believe it, but it doesn't conform to the plan of any ordinary house that you might expect or think of or have been into. And that's pretty much where I wanted to go with mine.
There's a description of maybe it was haunted at one point, but those ghosts have been almost like scared away, like sort of vermin running away from a larger predator coming in. And this idea that this something has come through at this point where Bridget and Conti have kind of connected with this.
It's creating the adult version of the cupboard in Narnia.
Right.
You know, it's that. The portal between worlds, and the portal emerges in accordance with your awareness of it being there, and that's what's so frightening. All you've got to do is stop yourself and you'll be okay, but you can't because you're aware now, and you feel like you'll really be safe if you can configure it properly, but that's exactly when you won't be. And that the house is the spot.
So
yeah, because everyone makes their own pact with evil by normalising it.
Okay, yeah.
Each of us does. Obviously not in the terms that each character does in the novel, where it's very stark, because they're in a house that's hell. It's the event horizon, isn't it? But that each of us normalises in our lives our relationship to things that are really unacceptable and shouldn't be occurring at the same time as this conversation. And we have to, partly because of powerlessness, or what we'd like to think is powerlessness, partly through laziness, partly for fear of going mad at the powerlessness and knowing that we're too lazy to actually do anything about it, morally and physically. So, and the way we accommodate that, the way we accommodate ourselves to that, is through pre-existing traits in our character that make us susceptible to finding a relationship with it, each in our own way. And with some of us, it will take the form of rank hypocrisy. Others of us, complete unawareness. And others, sort of masochistic torture. You're beating yourself up about it all the time. But each of us has to normalise what is totally unacceptable about life to be able to find our own way and live it, you know? And that's what happens in the house. That's what happens outside in the house. That was probably one of the few dogmatic and didactic things I definitely wanted to do in the book. A lot of the stuff, it emerged, you know, what works, what doesn't work. And a lot of the stuff that I thought I was going to do, I dropped because it was too corny. And I was forcing it on my characters. They were too weird and too normal to be horror story characters. But that thing about normalising evil lasted and got into the final draft because it's the one most compatible and elastic with the kind of story I was telling.
And who would you be pleased to play the role of Conti?
The young Tom Conti.
Oh, okay, all right, okay.
That was the clue, yeah.
Yeah. And who would you like to see play Bridget? Like, who would be a good actress for that?
Middle-aged Nicole Kidman.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And the...
Chantal, the young Winona Ryder.
Okay, yeah. I had like Vanessa Paradis going for
yeah, you could do, but Vanessa
80s icon.
Yeah, but Vanessa Paradis as an au pair is just too much of a stretch. You know, there's nothing homely or domestic about it. Vanessa Paradis was born in powder and puff. You know, so
How about the rector?
The rector is, I guess, if cross between Morgan Freeman, Samuel Jackson, and Chuck D.
Oh,
you know,
okay, yeah.
Gravity, gravitas,
that'd be great. Yeah.
So if you're listening, Chuck, yeah, if you want to hit the big leagues, that is 80s English demonic horror. Yeah, haven't you ever thought that?
Yeah.
Bring it on. We'll have a big game together.
The idea of hauntology, I suppose, is now taken on this
Mark Fisher.
Fisher's kind of let's say, like the sort of first or second wave of the idea of hauntology seems to have been appropriated by the folk horror scene, and now it takes on this kind of completely different dimension.
I think also, in fairness to the folk horror scene, the way you put it makes it almost sound as though folk horror is sort of a hipster version of the real thing. But Mark was attracted by a lot of first wave folk horror.
Sure.
And if you think of someone like Dennis Wheatley's second wave folk horror, then I think it's pretty bloody good, and as good as the first wave.
Sure.
But the hauntology is taking something from its initial context and appropriating it, and either putting it into entertainment, so that divorced from its original context, it either distills the essence of that context in a way that's entertaining or informative, or recreates it in a way that's utterly null, musically pointless, culturally worthless and void, depending on how you do it. But to be inspired by it, to tell stories again, like someone like Wheatley is, and not to be scared of the tropes of the past, they can actually help provide context for a really great tale. I think it's great, and that is what I was doing in Contented New Wealth. And of course, Spectre versus Rector is the fall. You know, one of Mark's favourite bands. He has a book. There's a book of his writing coming out at the end of the year, Collected Works, where his treatment of this song, which is just amazing. It's one of the best pieces of music criticism I've ever read. It'll be in that book, and that definitely, the way I was thinking of, you know, the fall set, the Spectre versus Rector in the Hampshire countryside. Obviously, that's where. Now, you know, it wasn't a conscious decision of mine, but just the sheer weirdness and the folk horror aspect, that's Contented New Wealth.
But also that kind of 80s, 70s, 80s kind of like feel to the whole thing. And it's very strong sense of time.
You can almost, it's kind of like, you can hear the Tales of the Unexpected soundtrack as appropriated by Ghostbox, or, you know, Pi Audio Corner, or whatever they're called, playing in the background.
Right.
Which is at once a tribute to those things, and looking to see whether you can take it further. Otherwise, hauntology is a pretty pointless activity, like psychogeography. If all you're going to say is, I've gone to a place and these are loads of things that happen there that aren't normally in the guidebooks. Yeah, cheers, mate. Yeah. Or, hey, guess what? You know, we've recorded some nuclear warnings of some BBC kind of advert from the 80s and stuck the funky drummer underneath it. Cool, yeah. You know, the point, the way that hauntology, as Mark would talk about it, where there's a lost future. You were living there at this time and you thought, you know, when you heard a synth go, that the future was about to be created, and that listening to this music is a mourning for the future that wasn't. That makes sense to me. But I think there's also a sort of shopping list hauntology, which is, let's just bundle all this together. And what have we done? It's a pointless collage of old signifiers and tat, cultural tat.
Kind of ever-looming.
And you can hear the Boards of Canada playing, and that the bit of John Carpenter, dum 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 dum. Yes.
Kind of ruined London, kind of it never was.
That book was definitely the beginning and end of my hauntological phase. It was in the air at the time. And obviously I was fortunate enough to work with Mark as well.
Sure.
So we did talk about it.
So I mean, obviously as
and I had absolutely no creative purchase in the concept, thinking of it, or defining it, or anything like that. I just would listen to him, think, no, that's what I'm doing too. I mean, I'm not an original philosophical thinker like he was, far from it.
But that kind of that appreciation that you could take some of the toolbox of horror and then use it for your own means.
Yeah.
You know, and take some of the tropes that were obviously well worn.
But yeah, of course. But I mean, again, there is a tribute. I mentioned him earlier, and I wasn't taking the wee-wee, though really I should have been taking the piss because he's dreadful. But the author to The Devil, a daughter, Dennis Wheatley, who did live in the New Forest and write about Satan a lot, about 6 times a week. I mean, he published thousands of books. Yeah. And of course, he thought Satan was in league with Joseph Stalin and the Communist Party of Great Britain and the National Union of Mine Workers, and that the only sort of person that could stop it is a retired Air Force colonel living in the New Forest who's just got to do his damnedest, and if in the process he can also get rid of super tax and chase out a few of those long-haired jeans and beards brigades from a poly, then so be it, And you've got again that whole kind of parochial Englishness facing Satan and demonic energy from thousands of years, and it's only a little bit of English common sense that's going to nail this problem. And that is just as big a part of my book, and the kind of playing around with it as the more kind of the things that we love, like The Wicker Man or The Exorcist, or the really good stuff. I mean, the bad stuff helped as well. You sit down and you think, this is totally preposterous. The devil's in there and you're going to throw a pint of warm mild over his head. Doesn't like that, does he? And it's all right, I've got my air pistol with me as well. In between the eyes, you horned one. So there was a lot of material to fall back on. It's just very little of it was good. I finished this book 10 years ago, and I've never been more sure of an uncertain response. I really didn't know whether people would go for it. The writing had been so difficult. The reaction from people whose opinions I normally trusted had been ambiguous, and I wasn't confident that I had connected with that aspect of my talent that knows how to land the plane in the right place. And the next year it won the independent book horror writers thing, and it did okay. I gave it absolutely everything I had. I'm really glad you guys enjoyed it as well. Thank you. And I, as I often do, just was putting my hands on them to see what was coming off them. And I remember when I got together with my wife and we were doing this at Avebury, she was like, Jesus Christ, she surprised me. I thought I'd married a superannuated mod, a sort of Del Boy, and now I can actually see it's Children of the Corn or Stones, And I mean, I've been up to the Cathar castles up in near Perpignan, and I sort of touched something, or the Monkey Island off Mumbai, and the temples there, and you can break your arm. And I don't know what it is, but it's happening. And I was stopping by different rocks and stones doing this, and I could feel Keith's growing anger. He's like, can you hurry up a bit? Like this. And he was too polite just to say, stop doing it, you dickhead. But I really could feel it. So it's really pleasant to be around guys that are sympathetic to this sort of thing.